Yes. Okay, let's begin. We wanted when we were having discussions about the event. We one idea that was strong from the beginning is that we wanted to conclude with activists, creators of action. Somehow, activists, as the Decolonize display has said, it doesn't capture the multiple dimension of this kind of creative activity and engagement. We have to work on the various concepts for that. But we wanted to have them, in addition to participating in these 2 days, to help us conclude the activity. And that involves saying something that they wanted to say that they could not say before, and also sharing some ideas, impressions, be in dialogue with what has been happening, and they have that freedom. So we gave them 15 minutes each, and we have, and where is Oscar? Okay, he's attending to, because then we have also, we have La Colectiva, we have Decolonize displays. Will you also take some more for the conclusion? Sure, I'll read the poem first. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, that would be a gift. Okay, thank you. So that's the idea, that then you will conclude us, help us to conclude in this panel, and then we will give some formalities at the end about the foundation, but you have the substance. And so since the Colectiva just participated, I think maybe we can begin with the Decolonize displays and we finish with them. Is that good? Okay. So I leave it, Nitasha. Amin. Okay. So Amin, Nitasha, and Marz. You don't know them, please. One last applause.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone that went before us and Colectiva Feminista. That was a really beautiful, concise write-up of what a kind of politics we also try to embody in New York City. And I say New York City because I think that that's where our experience is most based, but at the same time, I was raised in Palestine, and that's my experience with oppression and thinking about borders and nation states and so forth. But I think, and Nitasha comes from a different background in a different place in India, Punjab. These become really important in how we think about how we move in the world. So it has also informed how we organize. But one of the things that I want to offer, since these are concluding remarks, is in a way a form of radical honesty. And I think that I'm saying it in my personal name, and I think we all can hold that space for each other. I think these kind of meetups can do more, and they require more of us. And they, not more in terms of numbers, but more in terms of conversations with each other. There's very much to learn from each other and from conflict and different positionalities and identities that we hold. When we come together, it's too precious for there to be a panel and an audience. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think in the spirit of sharing, perhaps I can do that, we can all do that, perhaps end with better questions. So, having said that, in the spirit of radical honesty, had we been able to engage in more dialogue, I'll say that there's a big problem in how we think about law. As a person who's trained in law, as a person who graduated from Columbia with a master's in law, who was a lecturer at King's College and who was a practitioner on Wall Street in finance, I can say, fuck law. Now, law, it has a tactical appeal in movements. There's nothing, you don't deny spaces to anyone, but a recognition of what it is becomes important to kind of embodying a diversity of tactics and strategies. So, we, for example, and I'm being, again, with a lot of love sharing, just to kind of make it more of an example of what are the problems and the challenges. If we're talking about decolonization and decoloniality, then we need to get to the root of how do we decenter power amongst each other, how do we bring in the knowledges that we have in the room, not come together and then talk about it later in our own spaces, which then doesn't produce the kind of momentum that we want. So, we worked, for example, with forensic architecture. They're friends of ours. There's nothing wrong with that. But I was in Palestine when they put up a show, and they never changed the captions. So what does solidarity look like when it has an objectivity around death, and you choose one person who was murdered to evidentiary prove that only the Israelis, soldiers, would have killed him? What does that do for me as an act of solidarity? You're making art and aesthetics about death for people who know what it fucking is. It requires a questioning of our positionality, not that we have the right position right now, but there are always shifting from one space to another where we go. This is why the recognition of complicity needs to be enacted. So that's one thing around law, evidence, and appeal. I think evidentiary nonsense, it takes too much effort. How many times has forensic architecture brought cases to prove to us that law doesn't work? We know it. But then it's people with Israeli identities that are bring up on media to talk about the Palestinian struggle and Palestinian death and Palestinian liberation, and then we go aside and we say, how do movements get co-opted? And why isn't the victim speaking? So that's one thing. I think freedom and liberation look differently for different people, and I'm citing Gayatri Spivak. I think we're each other's class enemy, and that needs to be recognized. I think that we have a lot more that Fred Moten does in terms of saying, I know it's killing me. Do you know it's killing you too? That's what we think of decolonial solidarity and coalition building. Now, we said something about NGOs. This comes from our personal experience. NGOs buy off people. They limit it. Our experience with the Ford Foundation, which funds a lot of things as a shadowy entity, is in fact their money comes from Ford, just like that. But but that aside, what are they funding? They came in the 60s to destroy Black power. So now we end up having a conversation amongst each other. It's just like, well, what are the limits of where do we get our money from? And that's your position, but my position is different. So what we need to say is that we don't work, not to judge other people, but we don't work with NGOs. We don't work with NGOs because in the effort to decolonize, we reorient to each other. And in reorienting to each other, it's the recognition that at least from New York City, we're on unceded territory of Lileni Lenape. It is stolen, and that country was built on stolen labor, stolen bodies, stolen people. So what does that look like for me as a Palestinian to talk about settler colonialism when I'm a settler, a forced settler, but nevertheless a settler? We're making a political choice to align, not with efficiency, but to align with the most oppressed and to hold space for each other. We may not agree, but because of who's in the room, we're saying that's worth doing. And then the final thing I'll say on that point, it's not enough. We don't organize around identity. Politics of identity has brought us to the point of non-functionality. And it obscures class. There's a class issue in this room. It's not a bad thing because these are potential resources for our movement if you don't quibble with the word resources. But we can think of other mutual aid for enacting what we need to do. We don't need a revolution. It's how do our behaviors change? And the final thing I'll say on this is just like, it had came up slightly in the context of South Africa. Oh, peace, and peace without justice. I feel like these are tired conversations that have been going on forever. So then the point is, if we know that we're in this constant struggle, like Angela Davis would say, right, for freedom, then the question is how are we living now? And I'll just end it here because there's too much to say and I want to give the microphone off to other people. But like, if I'm a person, I'll just use myself as an example, who grew up in the first uprising, went to jail twice, came over here, studied philosophy, worked for Amnesty International, realized it's fucking bullshit, right? That's the NGO. Ended up practicing law, making $250,000, even though I come from a poor family who haven't been educated. This is me jumping classes and then realizing that my friends died. So am I going to be in the university teaching liberation? Or I'm going to be in the university organizing for outside and actually doing whatever I have to do under, above, aside the commons to do something now? And I think that the question of asking what do we do now embodies both research, aesthetics, organizing, action, love, care, dancing, partying, fucking, whatever it is that we want to be doing. But there's somehow in which we're holding space for each other that isn't imaginative enough. And it needs to be when we have this kind of resources.
Thanks. I'm just gonna add a few points to your point around class. And what I wanted to talk about is this notion of unity, and which feeds into this idea of numbers as force, right? So, and organizing around identity. So for us over the past year, a lot of what we've been dealing with on the streets, and maybe you guys can talk to this too, is this idea of like, oh, well, we're Black organizers, so we're, you know, there's some sort of imagined monolithic Black organizer. Like, oh, you're a Black queer woman, like that, you know, I know what that is. Like, that's a Black queer woman, and it's like, oh, like, we're all oppressed here. Like, let's all have equal voices, and we're all, without recognizing the different positionalities that we all hold, and the way that we, and some of us can class jump or do these other things or hold separate privileges in certain areas. And I'm thinking of it from two perspectives. One, I think of it of the trauma that folks hold, specifically myself as a Black queer woman, when entering coalition building work, and the anti-Blackness that is rampant in coalition building work. And that's something that we have to deal with, and that's something that we've really been dealing with in New York City in terms of how do you build trust with people? How do you actually organize across borders and struggles without losing the specificity of someone's border, or without playing the oppression Olympics, where one person is like, oh, but, you know, I got really fucked over, like my people, you know, have you heard? And that's not gonna help us either. But that's real shit, because people come in with trauma to these places, and outwardly it appears destructive. And in certain ways it is, but we have to get down to the root of where that's coming from. And I'm also trying to figure out another word to use other than trauma. We have to talk. So, I don't know, that's a placeholder for now. But on the other side, like when we were organizing around the Whitney, single-handedly, some of the people who fucked us the most, us being the movement, not DTP, were Black elitists. Like Black elite artists who were just like, oh, well, you know, I have a career. So that seems like a you thing. And I'm not gonna speak out, but don't worry, my silence isn't complicity, it's just silence. And that's also really fucked up. And I think that's, for the past year, that's been consuming so much of our time. So when I'm here and I'm thinking through Fanon, and I'm thinking through, I was talking with Nelson about his work on the outline of 10 Theses and how of coloniality and decoloniality, and how I've returned to that work. I've really just been thinking about how we embody coloniality, not just in our homes or at jobs or in the streets, but how we bring that same bullshit into our movement spaces. And what the hell are we gonna do about that collectively? How do we show up for each other when we know anti-Blackness is real as fuck and homophobia is real as fuck? My dad's a preacher in the South in the US. And he's coming from the civil rights movement, like lived through integration, all of that. And the conversations him and I have about why I broke away from the church, and I'm like, if we're gonna organize on identitarian politics, but you can't accept women or people who are queer, or all these, then where are we gonna get? And we disagreed for so long. And just recently he was just like, yeah, you know, the church is kind of fucked. And I'm like, yeah, you know, I heard it. And I hear the white man brought the shit to us to begin with. But, you know, who am I to say anything? And so he's like, wow, you know, I think you're onto something. This is what you're experiencing out there, too? I'm like, yeah, Dad, it's called patriarchy, you know? And so how do we really dismantle this shit, like, in our communities, not based on this, like, oh, like, you're Black, I'm Black, turn up. Like, we need more than that. So that's where I'm coming from. That's where I'm thinking of to kind of add to Amin's point around, like, class and positionality.
I'm gonna keep it short. Okay, so first thing, When we're talking about decolonization, and if anybody's coming to a decolonization conference to present, you need to know you need to dismantle the patriarchy within you, period, right? Like, I don't want to be in a decolonization conference, like, trying to, like, be sitting behind and being like, what the fuck is going on? Like, that should be the first step. Dismantling patriarchy is not an extra checkbox that only women are supposed to do, or queer women are supposed to do, or trans people are supposed to do. Right? So and it's not my job, I'm doing the job again, but it's not my job to point that out. That should be just part of your fucking practice at this point. Right? It shouldn't be like extra, oh, I'm queer, I'm fucking wearing a queer shirt. That's fine. But I don't want to be in this fucking space that's slow violence on every single level. So when you talk about decolonization, go dismantle patriarchy first. That's the first thing. Doesn't matter. And then the second thing is, I think that in terms of our movements, we do need radical love and care. And that comes from both feminist, trans, queer movements. We've been doing that work for a really long time. And nobody's going to stop doing that, right? And that's why I also don't believe in call-out culture, because, I mean, it's a toxic culture. Call-out culture is toxic. But we have reached that point where people need to have generosity. Simple generosity, have generosity. Right? And then the last thing about the pessimism, that's a fucking Western word. Just like, you know, I also speak to a lot of organizers in Delhi, and they warned me that there's so much pessimism coming in from the north into movements talking about, oh, the world is dying and we can't do anything. People are still fucking living, they're trying to eat. Right? If you want to learn about the Zapatistas, they're talking about against death and for life. Right? Their analysis is that at some point, because of where capitalism is taking us, or because of where we are, more than 50% of the people are going to die. They're already dying. We in fucking Britain, I didn't hear a single word about like what is happening to migrant refugees over here, or in Europe. So what are we fucking doing? And so, I mean, going back to what Amin was saying, I think that spaces like this are important spaces. These are important spaces to hold. These are some of the spaces that we have remained. Like, we don't have that many spaces. We have few public spaces where we go and do actions, so then we create that kind of time and space which is outside this time of coloniality. We could do the same thing in universities, in classrooms, like high school classrooms, in our houses. This is not something that's exceptional in that way. So I think like we should really make, and that's where probably like, you know, I think that it's not about pessimism or hope, it's about not having a choice. Right? We do not have a choice. So we have to do this work. And so there has to be fun and joy and love and care and healing, right? Because resistance is also healing. All of it needs to be part of this work. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Shariana and I, the rest of La Colectiva, we wanted to reflect a little about our interpretation of radical hope and what it means and how we define it through our work. These reflections are the product of our Escuela Feminista Radical, which is our political formation school. Our work is inserted in and is the continuation of a Black radical tradition, Black feminism, and decolonial thought. Therefore, our work is not just our own, but a collective self. We wanted to start with a special dedication. These thoughts and words go for those of us in the crossing, for those of us vulnerable to premature death, for those of us who were never meant to survive, for those of us who did not die, for those of us that are brave, for those of us, meaning all of us, we wake. We are the ones we've been waiting for. And in case you didn't catch it, I'm naming M. Jackie Alexander, Saidia Hartman, Audre Lorde, June Jordan, Barbara Smith, Christina Sharp, and Alice Walker. To answer how we define hope through our work, we took the description of this event as the premise. What's the nature of hope in our time, horizon, or possibility? As an answer to that questions, we have two proposals. The first one is that there's no future without rescuing the past. And the second one, which Shariana is going to discuss, is titled, How Do We Land the Fugitive Destiny? As I was crossing the Atlantic Ocean for the first time on our way here, I couldn't help but think about the Middle Passage and the first journey of horror that millions of enslaved African women, men, and children made across the Atlantic Ocean to the New World. It's impossible for us in La Colectiva, living in an island still intervened by the United States since 1898, after being colonized by Spain for 400 years, and when working in an organization who wants to build popular power against a capitalist, racist, and patriarchal system that oppresses us, not to reflect about the horrors that cemented our present. It's impossible not to think about the exploitation, domination, violation, expropriation, extermination, and naturalization of premature death for Black people. It's impossible to ignore that women were subjected to forced labor and rape, but also to be the very embodiment of the ships that brought them to their cruel destiny by marking their offspring with the slavery condemned. But maybe the most irreparable manifestation of the Atlantic slave trades resides precisely in all the stories that we cannot know and that will never be recovered. Not only the stories of pain and torture, but the stories of resistance, of solidarity, the stories of love, the stories of humanity. And when I say that it's impossible for us to think about hope, to struggle and resist without thinking about this past, it's because it's not the past. Like Saidiya Hartman said, our dispossession is ongoing. That past continues to shape how we live. Black women, Black people still bear the mark of the commodity. The state transforms us into nobody. Captivity, whether understood as slavery or the imposition of an illegal debt that compromises our future, the enclosure of the ghetto or the displacement or abandonment of poor communities, and the criminalization of Black and poor communities continues to be the prevailing schema. So when we are asked how the future looks like, it requires from us a self-reflective exercise that confronts us with ourselves and with the past. An exercise that requires us to define, to unbuild imaginaries, to debate history, to fight with so many silences. When talking about decolonization, we talk about the rupture with the modern project as a return to what we were before colonization. In La Colectiva, we believe that decolonization implies a return, yes, but the return to a point of no return. It implies precisely a journey to the past to resignify the present. It's a return that allows us to extract the knowledge obtained in the process, or los saberes, but also to correct or confront the archive. And that starts with a recognition not only of what our ancestors endured in the forms of pain and horror, but what they have resisted, their struggles to reject their dehumanization, to write a history against the archive, is to oppose that matrix of dispossession. That journey also starts with recognizing the power that's within us, a cluster of resistance processes in our genes that once faced the racial and capitalist system and still resisted. We cannot ever return to that point of origin because we have been marked by the colonial project. We also think that decolonization implies a return to the body. It is through the bodies that colonial reality materializes. The racialization of bodies not only conditions the way in which two opposed bodily experiences are lived, but rather aims to show two completely different ways of experiencing and being in the world. We have chosen to refuse that notion of mind over body and embrace the return of the body, or how we say it in La Cole, el regreso a la cuerpa. This embodiment of politics centers bodies in movement, in the streets, confronting the state, building other forms of resistance through and throughout the body. We also confront the idea that of colonial subject and bodies generate colonized societies. We put our Black, feminized, queers, colonized bodies on the streets to make visible the politics that violate us, the femicides, the gender violence, the rapes, the harassment, the evictions, the poverty, the community's displacement, the racial violence, the criminalization of poverty. Putting our bodies in the streets, confronting the state, the police, and the system of injustice with our bodies is recognizing ourselves vulnerable and at the same time assuming our own power. The moment we put the body with others, we create that collective force that transforms. Finally, we think that we have to create new signifiers unrelated to mother project reference, disregarding, for example, the idea of humanity that was denied to us, the individuality that separates us from others, and create new languages of hope and love between us. For this part, I wanted to read a poem from Ángela María Dávila, who was a Puerto Rican Black poet. Ante tanta visión de historia y prehistoria, de mitos, de verdades a medias o a cuartas, ante tanto soñarme me vi. La luz de 2 palabras me descolgó la sombra, animal triste. Soy un animal triste parado y caminando sobre un globo de tierra. Lo de animal lo digo con ternura y lo de triste lo digo con tristeza, como debe ser. Como siempre le enseñan a uno el color gris, un animal que habla para decirle a otro parecido su esperanza. Un mamífero triste con 2 manos metida en una cueva pensando en que amanezca, con una infancia torpe y oprimida por cosas tan ajenas. Un pequeño animal sobre una bola hermosa, un animal adulto, hembra con cría, que sabe hablar a veces y que quisiera ser un mejor animal, animal colectivo, que agarra de los otros la tristeza como un pan repartido, que aprende a reír solo si otro ríe, para ver cómo es, y que sabe decir: soy un animal triste, esperanzado, vivo, me reproduzco sobre un globo de tierra. In her poem, Ángela María embraces what she calls the animal. Instead of seeing herself as human, she talks tenderly about herself as a sad animal, sad but full of hope, stand but walking, an animal who talks to others about hope, an animal inside a cave waiting for the dawn, an animal oppressed by its childhood, a herd animal, but an animal who wants to be better, a collective animal. Ángela María not only validates sadness as a space of vindication and hope, but she embraces what she calls the collective animal as a new form of being and relating to others. In La Colectiva, we have embraced that collective animalia as a form of resisting, as a form of building another life, recognizing that decoloniality is a collective and active project. With others, we transform. With others, we dream. With others, we believe. And with others, we are the hope we long for. After hurricanes Irma and Maria nearly destroyed our island and revealed that the disaster was not natural but political, in that time of death and uncertainty, recognizing not only the need to revolt because we couldn't longer breathe, as Fanon said, but the necessity of creating those common languages of hope and love for our collective liberation, that we started our campaign Construyamos Otra Vida, or Build Another Life, as our resource of radical hope, to create resistance imaginaries, and most of all, to reach others with that idea of a better future. Construyamos Otra Vida has now become an idea adopted by many people and many groups and organizations in Puerto Rico, and it's a collective resource of hope. And after leaving you with my compañera Shariana, I wanted to share with you a little bit of a consigna, or a song that we use in our manifestations, related to Construyamos Otra Vida. In English, the consigna says, they are cornering me, they are cornering you, we have no way out, we only can fight, let's build another life. Y dice así: te están arrinconando, me están arrinconando, no tenemos salida, solo queda luchar, construyamos otra vida, solo queda luchar, construyamos otra vida. Thank you.
You can't build another life without defending the dead, as M. Norbese Philip would say. In terms of thinking about hope, and my part of this conversation, I would like to address the ways in where or how can we land a fugitive destiny, thinking about hope, and hope as something that kind of comes from despair. So I've been thinking a lot about despair, and that, as Zoan was saying, that point of no return when things are so bad that you can only hope for the better. So in this part, I would like to focus my arguments on four main arguments, actually. The first one, thinking about how do we create consciousness, and consciousness in a way that Biko might address Black consciousness, and Christina Sharp talks about wake work. And citing Christina Sharp's notion of wake work, she says, I mean wake work to be the mode of inhabiting and rupturing these episteme with our known, lived, and unimaginable lives, with that analytic we might imagine otherwise from what we know in the wake of slavery. So wake in the sense of that trace, that mark that is still with us, but also wake in the notion of mourning. That's why I mentioned that you can't build another life without defending the dead and thinking about death and thinking about the aftermath, the afterlife of slavery. So in the work of La Colectiva, we have, in a sense, made that return, as Zoan was mentioning, by thinking about also the return of the domestic. And a lot of the imageries that we have used are looking into struggling by reference, seeing what others have done before and are doing in the present. So the return of the domestic as well, and this is something that has, when you look into the revolts occurring in summer in Puerto Rico that finally gave in Governor Ricardo Rossello's resignation, the image of the casserole and the pots and the pans, which was something that La Colectiva started kind of like bringing back in 2017 as part of our political formation, learning from other social movements. And of course, we saw that in Latin America, the whole cacerolazos was a thing, and it kind of, the image of the pots and the pans and the noise. Then again, thinking about the musicality and the noise and the shrieks of it. So by mentioning the return of the domestic, the casserole, and struggling by reference and by looking into references, we also started to think about the wake work and this consciousness building as a collective self. The other argument is thinking about what Sajiya Hartman talks about, critical fabulation. And when you're confronting the archive and looking into the past, there are the many silences that are still there, and you cannot reconstruct because you were never a human to the archive. And the way our history is recorded is also thinking of us as commodities. And when I talk about us, I mean black bodies, brown bodies, in a white supremacist state. So critical fabulation creates first the notion of the fabula, right? And the lessons, the myths, as Gordon was mentioning earlier this morning, but of something that is not human. And why, in a way, we should refuse the idea of humanity and embrace animalia, as Angela Maria was talking about in her poem, as something that connects with others as part of a whole, but does not embrace humanity, because humanity has always been a white man's notion of supremacy. So when in doubt, be an animal, not a human. So that's why inserting critical fabulation as a way to twist around what the archive is saying and not saying, but also in ways in which we can gain by that experience of not not in a sense of looking justice for those who are not there, those who are disappeared, those who are dead, who were killed, tortured, raped, murdered, but also in a ways in which we can find that experience of collective resistance in order for us to gain hope. The third one, the third argument is maybe thinking about fugitive freedom in terms of what is the end goal of it. When we're struggling and we talk, like you say you want a revolution, and we want to build a revolution, and we're all for the revolution. Where are we thinking that's going to end? So it's no, I guess it's no coincidence that, the main theme of this conference is Fanon, hope, and the day after, right? And what does that day after look like in terms of understanding what is the other world, the other worlds, or the world of worlds, as the Zapatistas say, look like for us. And a lot of authors have mentioned that it's freedom, it's something fugitive because as long as you're trying to reach it, it kind of shifts and it changes. And in our political practice in La Colectiva, that has been reshifting in terms of the way we understand. And, first we were, trying to be very pragmatic and in terms very rigid and structured. Well, the revolution will look like this, and we have to aim for this, and then we kind of left out the space for error, the space to be self-reflective, the space for the effective. And that's something like we have to, then again, return to the basics. And thinking about that, connecting for the fourth argument is embracing the undoing and the failure. And it's something that it might be like an undertone in the conference. But when we think about failure and how our political projects have been undoing a lot of things, and we should embrace failure as something that constructs as well. In 2017, as our compañeras mentioned on the panel before, we were trying to think about the Martinique and Guadeloupe general strike as that destiny. We wanted to build a general strike in Puerto Rico because we studied, the movement, and the material conditions were very similar, that we understood that we had the means, right? There was like the context for it. So we already knew what was the destiny and what we were aiming, the objective. Then we created this platform and we started organizing around it. And like a lot of people didn't care. So we spent 2017 pushing for something that it seemed unreasonable, right? And then we, in a sense, got to live it 2 years after in summer. Like a lot of the references during the Rigi Renuncia, which was for the governor to resign protest, had a lot of the imagery that we pushed and inserted on 2017. The casserole, the plantons, even the articulation of the student movement, the May Day protest. So it had a lot of the aesthetics, the symbols, but it didn't have the mass movement on 2017, and then 2 years later it had. And when we talked about, a government elected official forced to resign, on 2017, we forced the resignation of Mayor, Guaynabo's mayor, for sexual harassment and sexual violence. So we inserted the references that, and it was by those failure that we 2 years later could create that. So in a sense, how do we build hope and how do we land a fugitive destiny? By creating consciousness through wake work, by creating the myths and contesting the archive by critical fabulation, by understanding that our destiny and that end goal, that objective will be in constant change in terms of it's a fugitive freedom, what we're aiming, and also by undoing and embracing failure. So I guess that would be, in a sense, a not so strict recipe for embracing, combating despair and trying to uplift hope. And I would like to end this with a kind of reformulation of Sujia Hartman's note on failure. So we begin the story again, as always, in the wake of disappearance, with the wild hope that our efforts can return her to the world. The conjunction of hope and defeat define this labor and leave open its outcome. The task of writing is impossible, not the fanciful or the utopian, but histories rendered unreal and fantastic. Has its prerequisites the embrace of likely failure and the readiness to accept the ongoing, unfinished, and provisional character of this effort, particularly when the arrangements of power occlude the very object we desire to rescue. Like us, we too emerge from the encounter with a sense of incompleteness and with the recognition that some part of the self is missing as a consequence of this engagement. So I understand that, I guess we need to understand that some part of ourselves is missing, and freedom will be the search of what is missing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. I should say that these are Zoan Davila and Shariana Ferrer, the other two members of the Colectiva, who were not introduced before. And if you were in Puerto Rico, you will very likely know who they are, because they appear in like maybe 90% to 80% of the pictures when they show groups of women coming out of the governor's house, of meetings with them. These are the two faces coming from there. So thank you so much to all of you for these reflections. I think that it should be these voices that in a way conclude the event. That was the idea, so that we stay with those thoughts. I would also add that I embrace the invitation to embrace failure, right? That's a lesson of successful movements, because we know that we go ups and downs, up and downs. And the important thing is to learn from failures and to keep walking. And in that walking, begin to walk with other peoples and begin to improve ourselves, right? And to form more collectives. And I think that as I see the work of the Fanon Foundation is part of the effort to try to link these different kind of projects, walking together, talking together, trying to organize together sometimes, or at least be in dialogue together, reaching our different perspectives and projects. And we hope that has been the case in this day and a half, that we go richer than what we were, even if only recognizing our own failures. And I would also invite all of you, this is an academic space. Not all the time the foundation has been met in an academic space. Last year we did it, but and yet did not do it because we also went out of the university. Before was not at the university. So this is the first time that we do it fully at the university. And I want all of you who are here from the university to see that, to know that when we have these activists, knowledge producers, change actors, we're still in the search for these words, that they are presenting another kind of different paradigm of engaging knowledge and creating, praxis and decolonizing knowledge and society and so on. So that, Don, please I would encourage you, do not then take them as objects of knowledge for your dissertations and for your next research paper, right? So do not ask them how they can apply radical hope in your next paper about this novel or this movement and so on, right? Try to break the ethos of a scholarship of the intellectual and see yourself as someone who is interrupting the ethos of capitalism, the ethos of coloniality, that is really trying to forge new ideas and new ways of being. So think yourself beyond the classroom, beyond the seminar, even beyond this very room. And so we're going to keep working. Hopefully we can keep working together to create those spaces where these dynamics happen more and more and more. And please, I would say a year from now, think yourself what you have done that goes in that spirit, in addition to writing papers on your dissertation. Okay? So I'm going to leave you with Mireille to say a few things about the task of the foundation, because the foundation has been approached to the project, and then of course Oscar should be coming soon, and then we have a poem, and we can maybe close with the poem in the tradition of the Caribbean Philosophical Association also.
First of all, thank you for your presentation and your coming, because it's really important for us as a Fanon Foundation to not stay at the level of university. It's really important to have link and to build this link with Decolonize the Place, Colectiva Feminista in Construccion, and others also. As we have a relation in France with Parti des Indigènes, and with other, for example, tomorrow there is a big demonstration against police violence, because it was 1 year ago, 150 young people, children. The youngest was 12, and I think the oldest was 18, something like that, and they were scholars, and they were arrested by the police and put with the hand up and on their knee during hours. Because the police found it was the best way to make silence young people in a very popular area. And there is a demonstration against the police violence, because also in France we have faced police violence, and we used to work with all the people, because it's really important to build from the ground what we could emancipate us, and not only with our brain. I think we will never be emancipated just by brain. Or
to the brain.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for that. And I want, just because some people ask about the video, in fact it was not in streaming. Normally it is streamed, but now it was not, because we are in very difficult area to get signal, Wi-Fi. And therefore, Christophe over there, and Asdin here, we have to thank them, because they will put that on the France Fanon website, and there is a special YouTube channel for the France Fanon website, and like that, all the intervention will be on. Like the other the three first rencontres are on the website, and you can follow what we are doing and what it was already done during these three first rencontres. Then I think really we have some plans with Decolonize the Place, and you will be very happy, because it's it is regarding law, the space. The space as normally has to be very careful with law, and it is the space where the law is the most violated by the United Nations right now. And we have a plan to do something regarding African descent people, and around the United Nations in the coming months. We will inform you about that. And I would like also thank Lewis. Lewis, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your participation, what you bring to our attention, and your precise construction, deconstruction of thinking, and the shift of geography. Thank you for that. Just to inform you before to thank Oscar and Laetitia and Kojo. Where is Kojo? He left?
He's on a mission.
Okay. And all of you. Okay, I would like inform we are planning to have some next rencontre on the topic. We don't know exactly where and when, but it will be on around self-determination and sovereignty. Because we think it's a very huge question right now, where the sovereignty of every state, every people is questioning by violence, and we want to bring some attention on this issue. And at the end, yes, but July or what? No, I mean the Basque. Yes, but we don't know yet. Okay. And we will do that with, in fact, the question of sovereignty and self-determination with people without state, and one of them is Basque. Basque, do you know where is it? Basque country. It's north of Spain and south of France. And we don't say Basque nord de la Basque en France. We don't say Basque in France or Basque in Spain, because Basque is only one country, but separate by Spain, by colonial border, colonial power in two parts, south of France and north of Spain. And we will see how we can organize. They ask us to organize with them, and we will see. We will inform you when it will be the time and where and when. We don't know yet, but normally in the current next year. I think now Kojo, Laetitia. Okay. As a chair of the Frantz Fanon Foundation, and Nelson as a member of the board of the Frantz Fanon Foundation, and as Dean too, we would like to thank you, all of you, Oscar to have very spontaneously, after the third rencontre in Rutgers, something is happening. There is a golpe. Okay.
Only words of more words of gratitude to you, Mireille, to you, Nelson. You haven't finished? Then, please.
I was waiting. You finish with Kojo.
No, we're trying to.
No,
work
I just
something
want
out.
to thank. We want to thank you for last year to have suggested to host the fourth rencontre here very spontaneously after Rutgers, if you remember, and really it was. Even if there is no Wi-Fi in this room, we managed, and it was. I think it was really an important moment, and an important moment for all of us. And for that, thank you so much, Laetitia, Kojo, and Oscar, and all the persons who help you to organize that. Thank you so much.
Laetitia?
Oscar, but it's really quick. Just to thank Oscar, because I think he's the only professor here that brings this kind of conference to Birkbeck, and this is really important. Since I arrived in 2014, usually it's a bunch of white men talking, so it's beautiful to see all of you, and actually Oscar is the one who is bringing all these people together. Thank you so much.
It is very important what Nelson just said about academic spaces. Academic spaces are very much in danger, are very much in trouble, not only in this country, but everywhere. And there aren't very many of these spaces left. Just this morning, a member of the audience approached me to let me know that she did not feel safe here in order to ask a question because this space reeked of anti-Semitism. Yes. So luckily, she was very surprised because she was very taken aback by Luis's lecture, and she was very, very surprised to learn that Luis, as you well know, is Jewish. So hopefully, we will not be receiving an email from the administration inquiring as to the values of these spaces, but that is only to show you that to do these things is costly. And we live now in a society in which just doing this, which is very humble, this is very modest what we're doing here, is already costly. Let me thank you all then for being here, because you're indeed incarnating a risk, and a very welcome risk you are. Become much more of a risk. That would be the only message that the Funk Collective, which I am part of, and I am only a part of that collective, would like to share with you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all in the audience for joining us. And of course, I did love the distinction that Nelson made this afternoon between hope and the day after. Because the day after brings some sobriety, but it is not the day after, not yet. So let me invite you to join us, to imbibe, to do the exact opposite of sobriety, to get drunk together. And we will do that at the Marlborough Arms, which is not far from here, in fact, very much close to here. So, Kojo, lead the way.
I will lead the way. Follow me for the drink. Thank you all very much. Poet, please.
Okay, thank you. I want to sit with the comrades. Thank you. One thing I think kind of we didn't have a chance to talk about is what's going on in India, and especially with relation to Kashmir and relation to Assam and what's happening with Muslims there. As a member of the kind of South Asian diaspora, I am continually disappointed by our representation in media because mainstream desis in the UK apparently support Hindu fascism. So we have a lot to work against here, and I like to think, and in the US too. Great. I was in Delhi when Kashmir was annexed and Article 370 was revoked, and I was reading Agha Shahid Ali, who's a Kashmiri American poet. And so this is, if I can make a grand gesture for the people of Kashmir, it's called, like Agha Shahid Ali, I too saw Kashmir from New Delhi at midnight. The article has been rendered inoperative. You can no longer speak of Kashmir, it has withered away into the muzzle. Kashmiriyat too is inoperative, a people stolen of identity in stealth, the manner of arbitrary anguish. To accede is to shut down freedom in the open-air prison. 370 inoperatives. Modification from state to union territory, operate the land, a coronary, a lake, a bifurcation, a technicality of definition. For some, a success, an integration. to make operative that which was accessed in steadfast, to point out administration. The article has been rendered inoperative. You no longer speak of complexities, but brandish the new ruler from tank. Soldiers stand instead of street performers. Jammu and Kashmir, too, is inoperative. A place, complicated, an annex of new history, fenced denizens without phones to call sovereign. A land mistaken for a people is a people objectified as spoils of the land. If inoperative, then fascist agri-logistics permit silent bloodshed. Oppression afoot, disguised as the open palm of integration. The article has been rendered inoperative. And so has the opposition, who are reduced to history lectures in the parliament sessions, who wave their papers at a red brick horizon. When the fibre optic line is inoperative, control and censorship flourish and dance as nationalists do on the graves of the occupied. Unnamed and deterritorialized, the inoperatives tried dissent in special sentiment of autonomy. It feels like a lifetime ago as nullification sieges unapologetically with the lynch and rifle of persecution. Like Aga Shahid Ali, I too saw Kashmir from New Delhi at midnight.